Welcome back to A Numbers Game with Ryan Gerdusky. Thank you for joining me again today. Happy Monday afternoon or whatever time and day you're listening, because podcasts go forever, I guess. So President Trump has been getting a bit of hot water among his base, especially after a recent appearance on the Laura Ingraham show where she pressed him about the number of foreign Chinese students being admitted to the U.S. and support for bringing in H-1B visa users, even as the tech sector fires thousands of Americans. It's deflated part of his base who may feel like he's backing away from his earlier promises. And I think that it's important in this rhetoric to really break down these issues and what's actually been happening and some numbers behind it. So first, on foreign student visas holders in America. During the 2023-2024 school year, America had 1.1 million foreign students in the country. Now, despite Trump's rhetoric on wanting to admit hundreds of thousands of Chinese students, President Trump's administration has tightened the rules around visas for foreign students, namely that their visas are only as good as long as they're enrolled in school. Currently, the visas actually allow students to stay in the country longer than the duration of their time in school. So they can stay for an extra year or two, even after they're done with college. He's also required now vetting procedures to look at students' social media posts. It'd be good if we found out if there's a student who sat there and said, I love Hitler, or I love Al Qaeda, that they probably shouldn't come into the country. And the administration is weighing in another rule to restrict the end of optional practical training known as the OPT program, which allows for international students to work to the U.S. for up to 12 months or 36 months if you're a STEM field after graduation. This tightening around our student visa system has led to a 17% drop in the current academic year, the largest drop in more than a decade aside from the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the Institute for International Education. Overseas students make up about 6% of the overall college population in the U.S. Now, the overall number hasn't declined by a lot. The drop is most among new student applications, but the overall drop hasn't happened in equal number because people have been able to stay for over a year. They're still in the programs. As the Trump administration continues, as long as it holds true to these reforms that it's done, the number of foreign students will drop over time. That's a break in rhetoric from what the president has said. What the president's done has been much closer to what he promised during the campaign. Now, let's talk about H-1B visas. The president's administration is set to publish a new rule at the end of this month, increasing the price of a new H-1B application to $100,000 per applicant. In Trump's proclamation, Trump is pushing the Department of Labor to enforce immigration laws and, most importantly, set the prevailing wages for H-1Bs, basically so they don't compete with American workers. Now, this happens regionally and locally. So a Deloitte consultant in Philadelphia will make about $60,000 per year, which is 34% less than the going rate in the area. It's done by areas, not nationally. This will hopefully tighten the rules and make it less desirable to hire foreigners over Americans. So once again, there's a break from what he said in recent interviews, especially the Laura Ingraham one, from what he's done. And I don't know who's advising him to say this. It's not something that I would tell the president if I was advising him. Immigration remains one of the most important issues facing our country, and in my opinion, the most important issue. It changes our country's economy, our culture, and most importantly, our politics. Conservatives need to remember every day that we make a choice. Our country decided to invite a radical socialist who would fundamentally alter our country and believe that we should be governed by international law. And that man, Zohran Mamdani, is set to become the mayor of our nation's largest city. Conservatives have been saying afterwards, I don't know why people who hate this country move here. The question I am posing to my mostly conservative audience is, why do we let them in? That's what you need to think about. This is a policy choice that every previous administration has made, to let people who want to change us in. President Trump, for the most part, has been very successful, especially on the issue of mass deportations. According to a report from DHS from back to September, about 400,000 illegal aliens have been deported. This is a higher rate than any other previous administration. Do not believe the narrative about President Obama. It is not true. He was counting people turned away at the border as self-deportation. Obviously, President Trump has secured the border, so there are not people being turned away to be counted. Interior enforcement, which is what President Trump has mostly done, he is the most successful president. And it's important to remember that it's also working as a deterrent, not only for illegal aliens currently living here, but also for people who would seek to come here. They're not making the journey. According to a recent study from the Kaiser Family Foundation to the New York Times, they found that the number of illegal immigrants currently living in the U.S. who would still choose to move here illegally if given the opportunity from when they came has dropped from 72% in 2023 to 56% in 2025. I personally do not like President Trump's comments on H-1Bs and foreign students. I believe that, it's very important to remember sometimes Trump speaks rhetorically and other things are happening in the administration, both good and bad on the part of conservatives. I think it's also important to parse through the rhetoric, though. It's not all just the last soundbite. And on illegal immigration, there is no question President Trump is the most successful president in our lifetime. On legal immigration, it's a little harder to parse through what's happening because the administration hasn't published all their data yet for 2025. So we're kind of just guessing a little bit based upon nonprofits and research organizations. But they have done certain things like limit the number of asylum seekers dramatically. They're bringing up lawsuits on birthright citizenship for illegal aliens, which acts as a major source of why people come here. They can have a child and their child can become a citizen and then sponsor them for citizens themselves. It's called anchor baby citizenship and chain migration. They have yet to do, though, what polling and what conservatives, polling, especially among Republicans, have been asking, which is real reduction based on legal immigration. A study by the libertarian organization Cato in 2021 found that 9% of Americans want no immigration at all, which is something I'm not personally in favor of. 45% want a 90% reduction, and 62% want at least a 50% reduction in illegal immigration. Remember, during the last year, President Trump's time in office, 2.8 million people entered the U.S. and 800,000 became citizens, the right to vote just as much as you and I. Roughly the same number of new Americans as the city of San Francisco. We added a city of San Francisco to our country as far as new citizens go in just 1 year through immigration. To put a bow on this, yes, I'm not a fan of what President Trump said, and Kristi Noem said something which I also don't even believe is true by what the administration is doing, but she said they're granting citizenship to even more people than Biden did. The numbers that I've seen so far don't add up to that at all. We'll find out at the end of the year, and if it is, I'll scorch them for it, but I don't believe that to be true. But I think that when you go past the rhetoric into the accomplishments that were really so heavily involved in the first half of the year that people sometimes forget, President Trump's doing the most to combat illegal immigration, and that's worth celebrating. He's making reforms to protect American workers. That's worth celebrating. And it's not time to sit there and lose our hair just because he says one or two comments that we may not like. Republicans on Capitol Hill, who haven't always been great on immigration, I mean, let's face it, before Trump, they were pretty horrible, have kind of changed their tune. There's not a lot of conversations around amnesty. There's not a lot of conversations around loosening immigration rules. There's a few, but not many, because they're taking their notes from President Trump. And hopefully those rising stars in the party will be able to carry this mantle, not only for the rest of Trump's term, but into the future after Trump leaves the White House in 2029. One of those stars, who was just an absolute rock star on the issue of immigration, who fights every day to protect America's borders and to reduce immigration, is Congressman Brandon Gill. He'll be up next. Congressman Brandon Gill is a freshman congressman from Texas's 26th district, quickly becoming one of the strongest fighters for the Republican Party in the House, especially on issues related to immigration. Thank you for being here, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
So you're one of the few Republicans in Congress who have an A+ rating from Numbers USA and other immigration groups. A lot of people, especially non-conservatives, say that, Trump's president, so what more could conservatives possibly want out of the House on immigration? What are some of your answers to that question?
Yeah, and listen, I think that mass migration is one of the biggest issues facing the United States and Western civilization today. So one thing that the House should be working on is codifying and making permanent some of President Trump's policies towards illegal immigration. And we did some of that in the big, beautiful tax bill earlier this year. We provided funding for full completion of the border wall, for full completion of river barriers on the southern border. We provided billions of dollars to fund the logistical infrastructure needed for mass deportations. We had funding for 10,000 new ICE agents, more DHS agents. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we should be working on. But you also have a variety of policies that the Trump administration has implemented via executive order One of them is his Remain in Mexico policy. It was something that he instituted first in his first administration. He brought it back earlier this year. I have a bill that would codify that, make that permanent, and so that you don't have a Democrat who gets elected president who unleashes the same kind of chaos on the country that Joe Biden did. And all Remain in Mexico does is it simply says if you're an alien and you're awaiting adjudication of an asylum claim, you need to wait in a safe third country, not in the United States. In other words, you can't cross our borders and wait for 5 or 7 or 8 years or longer for your asylum claims to be processed, because that, a wait period of that duration basically legalizes a mass invasion of the country. So I
Yeah,
think that that's one tangible thing that we could be doing.
yeah, and that bill, I looked it up right before you came on. It has 109 co-sponsors, and I just
Yep.
wonder, why are some of these good bills waiting so long to be voted for in the House, at least in subcommittees, let alone like on the House floor?
Yeah, I think that it's a longer term solution. We had a hearing, a bill markup, excuse me, in Judiciary Committee just yesterday, where we looked at a variety of different bills, including one of my own, which are sort of tangible things that we can do right now that would change policy and give the administration more flexibility on illegal immigration and deportations. This is something that's a longer term fix because, right now, Remain in Mexico is policy. So I'm hoping it's something that we can get on the docket and move. Whenever you have over 100 co-sponsors, including a couple of Democrats, by the way, that's a bill that I think is likely to pass the House floor. And whenever you've got some bipartisanship, whenever Democrats in the Senate recognize that illegal immigration is in fact a problem, you might be able to get it out of the Senate as well. It's tough to say, but I think this is something we should be moving. I've certainly been pushing really hard to get this
Yeah,
on
and
the floor.
you brought it up, so I mentioned there was a subcommittee hearing yesterday, and you had Congressman Eric Sliwa, who's very well known for having an affair with a Chinese spy. He attacked you for one of your other bills, which was expedited removal of criminal aliens. This has got to be an issue. I haven't polled it, but it's probably up there in the 80 percentile range.
Right.
And of course, he slammed personal attacks. It was nothing based on the merit of the actual bill, which would seem
Mhm.
obvious. Can you tell my audience about the bill itself?
Yeah. So what it does is it expands the categories under which illegal aliens are eligible for what's called administrative removal. And administrative removal is basically a fast track process to deport criminal illegal aliens out of the country. So we're just talking about some of the long wait times as asylum claims or other different claims that illegal aliens make are being processed. There are certain categories of illegal aliens, for instance, violent felons, aggravated felons right now, that can be deported after they've been apprehended within a few weeks. It could be even a couple days, depending on how fast this process goes. And that's called administrative removal. It's similar to what you see along the southern border, where an illegal alien is caught and they're basically just sent right back to where they came from. But this tends to happen more in the interior of the country. That's one of the key distinctions. So what this bill does is it says that if you're an illegal alien and you're convicted of any sexual assault, any sexual crime at all, crimes against certain categories of people, for instance, children, somebody over 65, any vulnerable group, if you've committed a variety of violent felony assaults, then you're going to be deported via administrative removal, or you're eligible to be deported via administrative removal. So it just expands those categories. And again, like you said, this is something that 80 or 90% of the country would agree with. I mean, if you're an illegal alien and you're coming into our country and you're sex trafficking minors, nobody wants you here. We want you out of our country as soon as we possibly can. And that's what this bill does.
And it's crazy that crimes against minors, you would think, would automatically be in that category
Yep.
already, and it's not. So
Right.
what subcommittee would that be in the House?
That's through the Judiciary
Or
Committee.
Judiciary, rather.
Yep.
Okay, so if you're, because this audience is in all 50 states, how would somebody who says, oh my God, Brandon, that's a great bill, I want to support your bill, which are the congressmen or which are the leaders that they sit there and send an email to and say, please bring Brandon's bill up to a vote? This seems so obvious.
Well, this is one that I think has a pretty high probability of getting to the House floor. The committee process is the first step to getting something to the floor. And that's where, if anybody wants to add an amendment to the bill or they want to change something, they can do that during this bill markup in committee. Now that it's through that, it's up to the majority leader and the speaker to bring it to the floor. But anybody can ask your congressman to push for this bill. We've got about a dozen co-sponsors roughly on it right now. I think we could get a lot more. And this is a bill that should easily sail through the House
Mhm.
without any problem at all. But
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
tell your local congressman.
Now, you're a freshman, so this is your first term, but you've been following politics as long as I have, and we've known each other a long time. And there was always this idea that congressional Republicans were not really on board with Trump's agenda and that they were kind of going along until they can get rid of him and move. In your year, how much do you think the Republicans have really gotten on his side on immigration? Because obviously we don't talk about
Mhm.
amnesty anymore like we used to. We don't talk about a lot of things like we used to. So there's definitely been some change. But how much do you think Republicans are really where Trump's campaign has been around mass deportation, about restrictionism, about other things like that?
Well, certainly on the illegal immigration front, I think you see broad deference to what the president is doing because this term is different than the first term, and the big difference is the interregnum during which Biden just drove our country off of a cliff. You're talking about 10 million plus illegal aliens that came into the country, murderers, rapists, gangbangers. I mean, some of the worst of the worst. And you saw communities across the country just be absolutely ravaged, not just from the crime but from the strain on our social services, housing, education, hospitals. I mean, you see it across the board. And I think the American people really saw that. They're the ones who bore the brunt of this. So right now, I think that if you're a Republican and you are opposed to deportations, that's a very politically difficult place to be. And I think most Republicans recognize this, and they recognize that there was a problem, a serious problem with illegal immigration during the Biden administration. And that's given the president, I think, a little bit more leeway to implement mass deportations, which, by the way, as you know, is something that most Americans support,
Mhm.
very much so.
Yeah.
There's some more work we can do on the legal immigration front. I think that that's going to be something we can get done. Of course, it's a more contentious issue, but that's going to be the next step.
Yeah, I think part of that, and you speak to it a lot, is the fact that immigration affects other things like
Yep.
housing, right? We always bring this up. How do you, and the prison population, all the rest of it, how do you sit there and try to gauge immigration as a more like holistic issue, saying this is not just about pure GDP or an extra Mexican
Mhm.
food truck or whatever in your district? How do you sit there and say this is about your housing and your education and the budgets and all and your local
Mhm.
community? How do conservatives sit there and engage on those issues as a full thing?
Well, I think one thing is that congressmen hear from their districts, and it's not just from the constituents, but you hear from local hospitals who are saying we've got longer wait times right now because we've got to treat illegal aliens who aren't paying us for medical services, which of course means everybody else pays more. You hear from your constituents that they're having to wait in hospitals for much longer than they should be, and you go to any public facility and half the people don't speak English. I mean, that is a
Mhm.
clear and obvious problem that congressmen can see, that their constituents can see, and let them know about. But the reality is, I mean, there's a huge economic burden of illegal immigration in the country. We're $38 trillion in debt right now. We're running $2 trillion annual deficits. And whenever you have illegal immigration that's estimated to cost about $180 billion a year from the state, local, and federal level, I mean, that's a huge drain on our resources, and it's just a fact.
Mhm.
And that's not something that you can debate. It's just there. We all know that that is true. And as we're talking about impacting the debt, as we're talking about creating a more cohesive society, I think that's something that congressmen recognize.
And I think that a big part of for conservatives, and this is mostly a conservative audience, but we were constantly said you have to be compassionate, you have to be compassionate, you have to be compassionate. And then
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, their eyes opened up earlier this month, and a man who did not believe in our Constitution, did not believe in our republic the way it is, was elected the mayor of New York City, and he was legally immigrated here. And a lot of Republicans say, why did his family want to come to a place that they hate? And I always say, why did we let them in?
That's exactly right. I mean, Zoran Mamdani's presence in the United States, his parents' presence in the United States, is a damning indictment of our legal immigration system. The purpose of legal immigration should be for us to ask who will benefit us by coming into our country. If you're going to come into our country, you need to come in on our terms, and you need to benefit us. And historically, prior to the 1960s, there were a few just kind of analytical criteria used to determine that. And one of them was that you can't come into the United States and be a public burden. So we cannot open up our borders and allow somebody to legally immigrate into the United States and immediately get on the dole and be on food stamps and get free housing and everything else that is for American citizens. And you can debate the extent of those programs, and that's separate, but they're not for illegal aliens. But the
Yeah.
second criteria was cultural assimilation. Whenever somebody immigrates into the United States, we expect them to adopt our culture and our customs and the American way of life. And that's just simply not happening. You
Yeah.
gave the example of New York. New York's a city that it's 38% roughly foreign born. And walk down any street in New York and you find out really quickly that most of those people are not assimilating. You hear 100 different languages spoken, and Democrats like to brag about that and say that this is a great thing. The reality is most Americans want to be able to communicate with their neighbor. They want to be able to live in a community or a neighborhood where they can walk their dog and not have to hear 100 different languages. They want to be able to say hi to their neighborhood and to their neighbors and actually live in a real community. I mean, you can't do that with mass migration.
What you're getting at is that there's a linkage, and this has been studied across many different cultures and countries, is between social trust and mass immigration. Over mass
Exactly.
immigration increases, social trust is depleted, and social trust is what societies are built on. For little things of, can I leave my door unlocked, my car
Mhm.
unlocked, whatever, to all the way to, can I trust that my neighbor's voting in my interest? Because
Yep.
when you have mass immigration, I want to just explain this for 1 second, is that you don't only distrust people who look differently than you distrust people who look the same as you. Trust decreases across the board. So yeah, it's super important. And one thing that Europe does that I don't know why we don't do is when they look at the cost of immigration, they look at nation of origin into both the first and second generation. I just think it'd be an interesting concept for Congress to take on as far as a look at, immigration is not like a bag of oranges. There's super successful ones, there's not successful ones. You don't have to bring everybody in. And I just think that that's a really important caveat to it.
Yep.
But overall, I think Trump has done an amazing job when it comes to illegal immigration, best in our lifetime. And I just hope that Congress is willing to step up and increase that and
Yep.
doesn't revert to Maria Salazar's of the world when everything is all said and done. Congressman, one last question for you. When it comes to immigration, do you think that, in this argument, in this upcoming election, rather, a lot of people, immigration has declined as an importance of an issue because we solved the border crisis. I mean, that's the problem with sometimes success. What do you fear if Democrats get in control of the House again, what they could do to kind of take a step back to what Trump's accomplished?
Well, on the immigration front, I think that it's going to be, the same kind of hell we saw under Joe Biden. Democrats know that mass migration politically benefits them at the expense of Republicans. And this is not a right-wing conspiracy theory. This is coming directly from Democratic leaders who have talked about for decades that demographic changes in the United States will benefit them. I mean, there's a book written about it,
The
in the
permanent
early
majority.
2000s. What
Yeah.
was that?
The Permanent Majority by Roy
Yep.
Tixeria. Yeah.
Exactly. And the emerging Democratic majority is another one. I mean, this is like their manual for, sort of systematically rigging elections by importing voters. And it has to do both with illegal aliens voting, but it also has to do with legal aliens who tend to vote Democrat. But it also has to do with illegal aliens who are impacting congressional apportionment. So whenever the census takes the poll of how many people live in each state, that impacts congressional apportionment, and that's based on the number of people in a state, not the number of American citizens. So you see blue states like New York and California get more congressional representation at the expense of red states. I mean, it really is a cynical plan to systematically rig elections for Democrats. That's what worries me long term. And I think Democrats know that. That's part of their playbook. And all they have to do is reopen the borders under a new Democrat administration to continue playing that out. Of course, you're going to see them stopping deportations, but I think you could very easily see them just open the gates up again.
Do they, in the big beautiful bill? I don't know this. How long do they do the ICE funding for? Is it just 1 year?
We provided about $200 billion in funding for border security, and that was the wall, river barriers, everything we were mentioning. We're going to have to re-up that at some point for the ICE. This will last us, I believe, for a couple of years. I mean,
Okay.
it's a substantial amount of money.
No, I know. It just, they could pull the
But
rug.
deportations need to last more than just the next 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Congressman, where can people go to follow what you put out there and on your Twitter and on your website and stuff?
We're all over social media on Twitter at Rep Brandon Gill. Also on Instagram, you can see a lot of the committee work that I'm doing. You can keep up with me there as well.
Yeah, Brandon is one of the few congressmen to manage to go viral almost every time he gets into a committee with an NPR exec or somebody else. So it's worth just checking out for entertainment purposes, and you learn a few things. So, Congressman, thank you so much for coming here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now it's time for Ask Me Anything. If you want a part of the Ask Me Anything segment, email me Ryan at numbersgamepodcast.com. That's Ryan at numberspluralgamepodcast.com. Look forward to these emails. This one comes from Joseph Pryor. He says, what are the real trade-offs of voter ID? Could it be used to suppress certain voting blocks in the current day? There have been a number of confirmed cases of illegals registered to vote, like in the Iowa superintendent, and ID checking in some states that are lax enough that this seems obvious that they have voted. It seems more likely that lax ID laws facilitate fraud by insiders than by mass participations by illegal aliens. The purported low fraud numbers don't seem credible. Your thoughts? Okay. Usually in where it has taken place in most places in the country where it's proven voter fraud, right? Large voter frauds, it doesn't typically happen among illegal immigration. Now, not that illegals never vote. They do, right? Especially where it's been investigated. There have been cases of illegal aliens voting. What has been more likely to happen, like there was a race in Connecticut recently, and I don't know the Iowa superintendent race specifically, but traditionally, especially like in Chicago and New York, places that were famous for voter fraud, what would happen is they would wait till the end of the day and they would probably get people in the projects, places where in certain urban communities, they would have the voting booth inside the physical building that people lived in, and either have people vote for them or have dead people vote. This is like the old Chicago method they would sit there and say, but it was specifically in urban centers because they could delay the release. They could sit there and have the last place to reporting, and it would happen in local elections. Illinois was very famous for it. It's not typically illegal immigration in large numbers, but it's not like it never happened. So stronger voting laws are really welcome with that. I don't know the Iowa case. I'm going to look it up. Iowa has voter ID law, but it's not photographic voter ID law. It's non-photo ID law. So I don't love that. I know some people could say, what if someone has an accident where they're disfigured or plastic surgery? I'm not sure that argument would necessarily hold up. In 2019, there was a study from Berry College that was published in the Atlantic Economic Journal, and it found that between 2004 to 2014, 9 states passed voter ID laws, and they found no connection to decreased voter turnout, especially among Black Americans. There was slight decreased turnout among Latinos. That may be illegal immigrants, but who knows? So the idea that voter ID, deters people to voting, that is a nonsensical argument. It is not true whatsoever. It has never been true. You need ID to do everything from buy alcohol to buy a lotto ticket to, your everyday life. This is completely a lie. Everyone knows it. In October 2024, Gallup asked Americans if they support voter ID issue laws. Only 15% said that they oppose both voter ID and proof of citizenship to go vote. 84% and 83% of Americans supported measures, both of them respectively. When asked specifically on party ID, I can tell you right now, 96% of Republicans, 84% of independents, and 66% of Democrats supported people proving that they were citizens to go vote. 98% of Republicans, 84% of independents, and 67% of Democrats supported voter ID laws. So it's just 15% either work for the media or are politicians, I guess, because Americans overwhelmingly support voter ID laws. And it's been proven time and time again in poll after poll. So voter ID is good. It works. People should support it, and the law should be passed to enforce it. That's this episode. I appreciate everyone listening. Please like and subscribe on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button and make sure you get all of our videos. So I really appreciate you all. Thank you, and I will see you guys on Thursday.